Alright, I'm going to show you how to use the inverse property of addition to solve these one-step equations. So the inverse property of addition says that if I add an opposite to a number, it will become 0. Now anytime I'm trying to solve an equation or an inequality, I'm trying to isolate my variable. In this case, my variable is c. Right now it's being added to 17, so I need the 17 to go away to isolate that variable. So to make my 17 go away, I'm going to add the opposite. If I add negative 17, 17 and negative 17 we know equals 0. So now instead of being added to 17, c is being added to 0. So that was the inverse property right there that I used. Adding opposites equals 0. Okay, so that's the inverse property of addition. Now, I can't just do something on one side of an equation. I always have to match it on the other side. So if I add negative 17 to this left side of the equation, I also have to add it over here to the right side of the equation. That's called the equality property. Whatever I do to one side of an equation, I have to do to the other. Okay, so that's the equality property, in this case, addition. So I go ahead and do negative 29 plus negative 17. When I add two negatives, it's just going to be a bigger negative. Carry my 1, I get negative 46. So c plus 0 equals negative 46. Now we know that c plus 0 is really just the same thing as c. Remember that c plus 0 and c are the same thing. That's the identity property of addition. So that really means that c equals negative 46. So those are the steps I'm using to solve any of my addition one-step problems. It is not necessary for you to show the c plus 0 step. You can just show it as crossing out the negative 17. So over here I'll show you just a quick little. If I had c plus 17 equals negative 29, you only have to show it as adding your opposite. You can show that that equals 0 by crossing them out, and show that just c, which is left over here, equals negative 46. So these are all the steps you personally need to show in your work. But over here we can see why that all works and what properties we're using. We use the inverse property to make the 17 equal 0. We use the equality property to balance out our equation. And we use the identity property to say, well, c plus 0 is the same thing as c. So I'm just going to write c for my answer, and I isolated my variable. All right, so let's look at another one. So anytime we have a negative, it's a really smart idea to go ahead and change it to plus a negative. Sorry, anytime we have a subtraction sign, good idea to change it to plus a negative. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing. So right now I have a negative x, and it's being added to 11. So I want to add the opposite of 11, which would be negative 11. So 11 plus negative 11, again, is 0, inverse property. Add negative 11 to this side. So 14 plus negative 11 is 3. So now I've used my equality property to balance out the equation. So this 3 is equal to what's left over here. What's left over here is a negative x. So normally I'd be done at this point, but there's something a little wrong here because I have negative x. Well, if negative x equals 3, that means my positive x has to equal negative 3. We always want to solve for the positive of the variable. We want to get the variable completely isolated, including getting rid of any negative signs. So my final answer is x equals negative 3. You can go back and check it. 11 minus negative 3, so minus negative 3 would be a plus. So 11 plus 3 is 14. Now correct. Let's try another one. So this still works with inequalities, same steps. I want to isolate my variable a. That means I need to get rid of negative 5. So I add the opposite, which is 5. That's the inverse property, which equals 0. I need to balance out my inequality. So I have to add 5 to this side also. Negative 10 plus 5 is a negative 5. So negative 5 is greater than or equal to, I just keep that same sign I had up here and move it down here. A is all that's left on the left side of my equation. So that means a could be anything that's less than or equal to negative 5. So it could be negative 5, it could be negative 6, it could be negative 6.5, it could be negative 80,000. So A is just anything that's less than or equal to negative 5. All right, one last one to really show this. I have a minus sign again, so remember anytime I have a minus, I'm going to change it to plus or negative. So that means I'm adding positive 24 to get rid of my negative 24. Negative 24 and positive 24 are 0, so that they go away. Equality property, I have to balance it out, so I add 24 also to this side. So negative 7 plus positive 24, that's going to be a positive 17. I keep my same inequality sign, and all that's left over here is an R. So that means R is anything greater than 17. So to recap my properties I'm using, my inverse property of addition right here means that this equals 0, so that's the inverse property of addition. My equality property is keeping this inequality balanced, so there's my equality property. Gotta do the same thing to both sides of an equation or inequality. And then my identity property isn't as obvious here, but the reason I can write just R instead of R plus 0 is the identity property. R plus 0 would be the same thing as just R. So I just skip that R plus 0 step and go ahead and write the R. And that's how you solve one-step equations with adding and subtracting.